We don't want your privileged life. We belong out there!
No, you belong to us! You cannot fathom how much we have invested in you. We saved you, gave you a home, an identity.
We already had an identity. We are not these.
No! You are what I made you!
Hey guys, Matt here. I was never really planning on making this video. Mostly because I wasn't really planning on playing a game based on a franchise that never piqued my interest in the first place. And to be fair, I only have the game because one of my friends gave me a free key. Jeen, dankjewel hè, buurman. But just like every other person on the planet, I did watch that first Avatar movie all the way back in 2009. And its world, made up by the same mind that gave us the fucking Terminator, is an intriguing one. Those visuals still look amazing today, the premise is interesting, and the world of Pandora looks so detailed and well thought out, it'd be a shame for it to be depicted only in that one movie where the acting really wasn't that great, except for Sigourney Weaver, obviously, and the story was about as deep as my sleep after the 11th cup of coffee. And while I'm still being completely honest, to me it always felt like Avatar's sole purpose on this planet was not to tell an interesting story or become this Tolkien-sized example of world building, but rather just as an excuse to start yet another bankable franchise. I could be wrong about that, of course, but every single time I hear someone talk about Avatar's sequel, The Way of Water, the conversation always starts with, of course they made a sequel, look how much money the first one made. Instead of someone saying, man, I love the story of the first one so much, I wonder what will happen next. But before I get sidetracked even more, one of the biggest positive aspects a multimedia franchise brings with it is the opportunity to see that world being turned into a video game. And I did always feel like the Avatar universe could work very well as a playable one. With all the exposition these movies had, there was always a lot of possible gameplay opportunities. So long story short, would there be any developer who's willing to make a large living, breathing open world with gorgeous visuals and lots of things to do that also follows an incredibly mediocre story only out of necessity to be turned into a bankable multimedia franchise that will be milked for all it's worth? Well, of course, it's Ubisoft. So, is Avatar Frontiers of Pandora actually a genuinely interesting new take on Ubisoft's open world formula, or is it nothing more than just Far Cry with Smurfs? Keep in mind that this isn't a full start to finish review, but here's at least some gameplay and my first impressions on Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. Also, spoiler alert, though I will only talk about story aspects from the early hours of the game, so no late game spoilers.
You have no song cord.
We had my mother's, but they stole it.
We must change that.
From the moment the story starts, I encountered the same problem that I also had with the movies. Everything in this universe is black and white. The introduction sees us playing as a Na'vi child within an RDA facility, the RDA being this world's human organization who tries to colonize the planet of Pandora because of its huge amounts of resources. While your teacher, who is also a human, is actually one of the more likable people, every single other human being in this facility is just completely over-the-top comic book style evil. Here was this perfect opportunity to maybe make a story about desperate humans trying to find a new home because all of Earth's resources are depleted, but no, they come in, build machines so polluting it's almost comical, they spew out racist remarks towards the indigenous Na'vi, kill your sister, and basically use the Geneva Convention as a to-do list.
Get rid of them.
On the complete other side of the spectrum, you have the equally ridiculous, almost angelically good Na'vi and the humans who side with them. Where the RDA comes barging in like a Trump supporter in a Greenpeace convention, the other side is made up of mostly blue natives who respect nature, have an unholy amount of loyalty towards each other and the creatures around them, even basically saying, oh no, I'm really sorry for shooting you, but I kinda need a new coat every time they hunt down an animal. They've got good guys plastered above their heads so clearly it borders on being annoying.
Your spirit goes to Awa, and your body stays to become part of the people. Thank you for these gifts.
So from this point on, you might expect to see a story about a conflicted protagonist, being raised by humans who told you that your clan abandoned you, seeing them do horrible things to you and your friends, but maybe still feeling some sort of Stockholm Syndrome form of loyalty towards them, while also trying to figure out where you really belong. No, actually, the spirit of your ancestors never left you, even though you have no clue who those are, and you start killing RDA soldiers from the moment you lay eyes on them. Hey, aren't those the people you've been living alongside with for your entire life? Those make really nice targets for the bow and arrow tutorial. Instead, your loyalty now lies with the Resistance, who, apart from your teacher from back in the day, you've now known for the better half of 5 minutes. You don't know anything about their intentions, they aren't really explained in depth either, but just trust us because we are the Resistance. It's all elementary school levels of explaining good versus bad, and never touches upon the grey area in the middle of those two. Never will you see an RDA soldier question his morals, never will you see a Na'vi stoop to the same lows that the humans constantly do. And yes, there are characters that question their own beliefs and try to understand the other side of the conflict, but it always stays on the surface and never dares to delve deeper into many of the characters' stories. Though I will repeat that this is a first impressions video, so maybe the game just starts touching upon these sorts of subjects after the 20 hours I've had with it. Also, quick side note, this game does have a character creator, but as I've said, you play as a Na'vi, not as a human and its coexisting Na'vi avatar. Which is not that big of a deal, I can see why they chose not to go this route, but I can't help but feel that it's kind of a missed opportunity to not be able to switch between the two in this game. Even the 2009 Avatar game, despite the many flaws that game has of its own, don't get me wrong, you play as both human and Na'vi, and you can even choose who to side with. Though to be fair, why would you want to side with the irrationally genocidal maniacs that are the humans in this universe, outside anything other than just simple curiosity? But to go back to the story, everything I've talked about so far all ties in with one of the biggest problems in the early hours of the game: pacing. The entire introduction within the RDA facility, setting up the story, the antagonists, some of your allies, the world, and of course some of the base gameplay mechanics are told within the time span of at most half an hour. To put that into perspective, later on you can do a side quest in which you have to gather fruit of superior quality for an old man, which took me 45 minutes because I couldn't find the damn things. From the moment you've reached the Resistance HQ, you're set free to do whatever you want. As far as the main story goes, it means you'll have to convince other clans to join the war against the RDA. An interesting premise for sure, especially because that ties in with the game's clan favor mechanic. This mechanic means you'll have to complete objectives and chores for clan members in order to get on their good side. That is a great idea for a game until you realize that every single side objective is just a repetitive fetch quest. Find me this object, give me this fruit, help me search my friend. It all boils down to talk to someone, walk somewhere, do something, walk back. It's like playing a Bethesda game but with the entire dialogue system missing, so conversations are just you listening to someone else listing their groceries. So you mean that the premise of the story gets explained to me in 30 minutes, but I need to do 4 hours of repetitive side quests in order to eventually progress the story? On top of that, because of this system, you'll be introduced to so many characters at the same time that you'll probably never really feel connected to any of it, as well as that, yet again, you'll never delve deeper into any of those stories. So no, I'm not necessarily interested in the story up until this point. But it's not all terrible, and there is a very understandable reason as to why I kept playing and why I wanted to make this video in the first place. First and foremost, it's Pandora itself. The black and white relation between you and the enemy is quite ironically in huge contrast with this overly vibrant game world. Even though this video game has to compete with the arguably even more impressive CGI in the movies, Pandora looks insanely good, and I'm willing to bet that this is the best looking jungle/forest that has ever been made in an open world, with ridiculous amounts of flora and fauna found in even more depth and obviously with more freedom here than in the movies. And it makes sense because nature plays a very important role in the game. Many of the plants and their fruits can be picked up in order to craft items, cook food, or to give you a buff in combat. Some plants help you traverse through the world, others are poisonous and will hurt you or give you a temporary disadvantage. There are even those shiny plants from the movie you can connect with, which in this game is a way of giving you new skills. I do want to add, it's kind of weird how your species' deep-rooted connection to nature now taught you the ability to yeet a soldier out of his mech suit, but hey, it's nothing if not useful. Despite the amount of flora and fauna you'll find in the early hours and how overwhelming that can be, you do get the feeling that it's all here for a reason and nothing really feels unnecessary. Which is a good thing, of course. With such a beautiful and varied world, you'd hope that exploring it is just as enjoyable, and luckily it is. Traversal is done by what can almost be described as parkour. No, it's not as in-depth as in a game like Dying Light, but in many ways it made me think of a less extensive but more refined version of what was seen in Mirror's Edge. It's not like you can swing, wall jump or climb with the same amount of expressiveness as in that game, but when you get a good pace going, jumping over tree trunks, running across huge branches and being swung across canyons, it does all feel very refined and fluid. The Na'vi are portrayed as these lean and athletic creatures, and that is beautifully translated into gameplay in Frontiers of Pandora. And it doesn't stop there, because traveling isn't exclusively done on foot. Pretty early on in the game you get to choose your own Ikran. Not only is the obstacle course towards your Ikran probably the best example of how well the traversal on foot can be, but it ends in your very first Ikran flight, which means the world opens up even more with the entire sky now at your disposal. Of course I called my Ikran Floof because I'm cringe like that, but I do love their design, the fact you need to connect with them in this sort of way, and flying with these creatures might be one of the most cinematic experiences this game has to offer. Yet again, it can be overwhelming, but it really is cool to think to yourself, I wonder if I can go all the way up there. Yes you can. You can go everywhere. And despite seeing nothing but trees for the past 20 hours or so, this huge forest is only 1/4 of the world, with the map already giving slight clues to different biomes you'll explore as you'll progress through the story. Then of course we have to talk about combat. In this sense the game does really start to feel like a lesser fleshed out Far Cry game. With a fairly limited amount of weapons in the early hours, you will fight against an even more limited amount of enemies. Pandora might be this incredibly huge and detailed world, but as far as the wildlife goes you'll mostly only fight against viper wolves, with only a handful of other wildlife attacking you only when you get too close. Most of the smaller animals, like lizards and giant moths, are basically just set dressing instead of actual animals you'll interact with. But it doesn't hold a candle to the lack of variety in human enemies. On the ground you'll encounter soldiers on foot, in mech suits, and a few bigger ones also in mech suits. That's it. Every single patrol, every outpost, every story mission, no more than these 3 enemies, only slightly altered by the weapons they carry. Am I to believe that the highly advanced army portrayed in those earlier mentioned movies are on some sort of budget right now? And yes, the gunplay and especially bow and arrows are satisfying to use in combination with a quick and fluid movement, but that doesn't really matter when every encounter will boil down to you popping up from cover, shooting a bunch of soldiers that will forget you are there from the moment you pop back into cover, wait for your health to replenish, and repeat until the outpost is cleared. Stealth might be a better and more enjoyable option in this case, but Frontiers of Pandora is yet another game where if one enemy spotted you, everyone in the vicinity now knows your position. As soon as you'll get your Ikran, you also get the opportunity to fight from the sky. And yes, flying into combat on the back of your own personal dragon while raining hell from the sky with a shotgun is just as cool as it sounds, but it's also quite unpractical since you can't easily hide away to replenish your health. And in this game, as soon as you're out of cover, enemies suddenly have this laser beam accuracy that chips away at your health faster than you can say bullshit. Worth noting is the fact that in the sky you'll encounter one extra sort of enemy, helicopters. But since they are shot out of the sky with 2 simple shotgun shells, it's fair to say that they don't really pose a serious threat. I can only hope that later on in the game the amount of enemies will at the very least double. It's also just such a shame that you're always on your own in these encounters. I thought the Na'vi were at war with the RDA, but you're either visiting these incredibly serene and peaceful places where the Na'vi are just sitting on their ass, or you'll single-handedly take out hordes of RDA soldiers in their settlements. Never will you encounter RDA soldiers raiding the homes of the Na'vi, never will you find Na'vi attacking RDA patrols. It's like these two factions exist completely alongside each other, and you, the player, are the only one crossing between the two. It's the lack of these sorts of unscripted and organic events that would have made it feel like you're actually part of a large-scale war, instead of you one-man armying your way through it. All in all, the combat is a bit shallow, but it's entertaining for as long as these encounters mostly last. I can personally easily look past this, mostly because the combat alternates with gameplay elements I do really like. And most of my positivity towards gameplay and the world itself is found within its attention to detail. From the Na'vi being huge and having to bend down to talk with humans, to all the animations used for gathering resources, to the simplistic but functional investigation mechanics found throughout the story. It's things like these that keep me interested. Sure, the earlier mentioned outposts and the combat within them might not be the most in-depth gameplay you'll ever see, but seeing the switch from lush nature to a heavily polluted area as soon as you enter these outposts is a sight to behold. Let alone that watching nature returning to these areas does look amazing. Especially when returning a little later and seeing how these machines have become completely overgrown. These are by no means revolutionary mechanics, but seeing nature reclaiming these areas, building a relationship with clans by doing these missions, which grant you more privileges within them, building an army, which I can only guess at this point will result in some sort of huge third act battle against the RDA nearing the end of the game, that is where the game really shines.
Etua and I will stand beside you and lead our people together.
In conclusion, Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora isn't some sort of revolutionary game that is going to change the way you look at Ubisoft open world titles. The story doesn't do the size of this insane world any justice, at least in the early hours of the game, and you're introduced to so many characters that you're probably going to have trouble caring about any of them. It's a shame that in a world that looks so well thought out, you will rarely delve deeper into any of the adventures that take place within it. It's also a damn shame that it will almost always feel like you are the only one that actually impacts this world, while everyone else just waits for you to come along. It's hard to take this supposed war between two huge factions serious when you are the only one fighting it. This lack of an interesting story also makes it so that side quests often feel like you're doing mundane chores for others that they could have easily done themselves. In that sort of way, Frontiers of Pandora falls victim to the exact same criticisms Ubisoft open world games have been getting for the past decade now, if not longer. Outpost liberations, fetch quests, a minimap scattered with unnecessary side activities, you name it. In many ways, it makes gameplay feel pretty lackluster at some points throughout the game. Which is a shame because in its core, the gameplay can be a lot of fun. Running through these beautiful looking biomes, shooting helicopters out of the sky while flying on your ecran, watching the oh so important nature reclaim the human settlements after you've defeated them, it's all incredibly entertaining and definitely a sight to behold. I was genuinely surprised how many aspects of those movies translate into good gameplay features. And as a video game based on a movie, it is by far one of the best, or at the very least one of the most ambitious ones I've ever seen and played. It has a lot of aspects to make it worth playing through, and I wholeheartedly believe that Frontiers of Pandora is more than just a Far Cry clone, or just another Ubisoft open world. There's a lot of fun to be had, and a lot of cinematic or visual aspects that make your jaw drop. Add to that the ability to play the entirety of the story in co-op, and you have yourself a game that is worth a playthrough. But whether or not you think that this game is worth its €7 price tag, I'll leave that up to you. Personally, I have to be honest and say that if I had to pay full price for it myself, I never would have bought it. As much as I'm enjoying the game, for me it feels too much like just another RPG game. A genre which in many ways has become oversaturated with unnecessary side content instead of an interesting main story or useful gameplay mechanics. And also just keep in mind that I'm just not that much of an Avatar fan to begin with. But if you do decide to buy this game, know that you will buy something where the developers at least tried their very best to make something that is worth your time. Thanks for watching. As always, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I know this is something completely different than my Need for Speed video, which at this point is nearly reaching 100,000 views, which is absolutely insane to me, by the way. Thanks a lot for all the support. But in between those 40-minute behemoths, I also want to keep making these sorts of videos, which I can upload a lot more frequent. So yet again, thanks a lot for watching, thanks a lot for all of the support, and I really hope to see you in the next video. Bye!
That's permanent.